This episode is sponsored by RevUp Academy. Before we jump in, I want you to picture this. You step into 2026 as a completely different version of yourself, the revenue-minded CS pro that teams fight to hire, the strategic partner that your executives rely on, and the person who can run value-driven conversations, influence renewals, and tie customer outcomes directly to commercial impact. That version of you is not a fantasy. It just needs the right room, the right frameworks, and the right coaching. And that is exactly what RevUp Academy is built for. It's my exclusive 6-week coaching program for a small group of ambitious customer success pros who want to level up fast. And here is the important part. Enrollment is open right now. And if you want to enroll, you've got to do it quick because doors are closing on February 5th. And once they close, we fully shift into supporting our new cohort. So we will not be opening doors again until late 2026. So if you want to start the year as a stronger, more confident, revenue-focused version of yourself, you've got to act fast. Go to thecustomersuccesspro.com/revup and register today. Seriously, do not wait. Waiting until later this year will actually cost you more than the course. So today we are going to guarantee that you see results and become more strategic and revenue focused. Just go to thecustomersuccesspro.com/revup and I can't wait to see you inside. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Anika Zubair, and welcome to the Customer Success Pro podcast, your go-to space for real talk, expert advice, and actionable insights in the world of customer success. I'm a CS executive leader, award-winning strategist, CS coach, and customer success fanatic. I help CSMs and CS leaders build the skills and the confidence to become revenue-driving pros and scale world-class CS teams. So whether you're brand new to CS or a seasoned leader, this podcast is here to support your growth. Because customer success isn't a destination, it's a journey. And I'm here to be your guide and navigate every step of your journey. So join me every Wednesday where you'll get fresh CS tips, tricks, and strategies you can actually use. Some weeks I'll share my own insights and best practices from working in CS over the last 13 years. And once a month, I'll bring on expert guests to dive into the most relevant and pressing topics in customer success today. So if you're ready to level up, hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune in, and let's make your CS journey a little bit easier together. Today, I am sitting down with someone who knows how to turn renewals into actual revenue momentum instead of a last-minute scramble. My guest is Emma Lambert, a customer success leader with 15 years of experience of building high-performing teams and driving serious commercial impact. Emma is the VP of Customer Success at Ably, where she leads CSMs, solution architects, and support who support some of the biggest brands in the world. Her team sits at the intersection of technical depth and commercial ownership, which means they are not just protecting accounts, but they are expanding them. She has built a reputation for helping teams connect value delivery with revenue outcomes and for creating customer conversations that consistently uncover new opportunities. And in today's episode, we are diving into a topic every CS leader needs right now, which is how to turn renewals into a predictable revenue forecast and a healthy upsell pipeline. We are going to get into the real mechanics of forecasting confidence and what teams miss when they approach renewals as isolated tasks, and how to build a system that ties customers' value into commercial clarity. If you want your renewals to stop feeling like guesswork and start acting like a revenue engine, this conversation is going to help you out. So let's chat to Emma. Welcome, Emma, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have this conversation today with you. I think it's very topical. It's very, very on brand for both of us and what we always talk about in general. So I am just so super excited to have this chat today. But before we get into it, before we dive in, I would love to hear from you about who you are. Give my listeners a little bit of your background, kind of how you started at Ably and like what your role is and what you're up to right now.
For sure. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. So I I've been in customer success probably coming up to like 15 years now. I don't really like to admit that, but I am. And I've mostly built commercial customer success teams for small/medium-sized startup businesses, some larger companies as well. I've had a bit of a mixed bag of experience. But I'm currently the VP of Customer at Ably, so I look after customer success, customer support, and customer operations.
I love that. I love that. The full customer team. And I love that you just mentioned commercial because for some reason it's considered a dirty word, but we're going to debunk that today. We're definitely not going to consider it a dirty word after we get through this episode. But it is a very hot topic, and it is something that I think customer success has to get more and more comfortable with, which we are going to talk about. But tell me more about your team, about what it is you guys are responsible for. It looks like you're looking after the full post-sale, so everything from CS, support, enablement, everything in between seems like it's a part of your team. But what is your team doing? What is it that you guys are held accountable to? Tell me a little bit more.
For sure. So my team of CSMs really come in sort of about 80% of the sales cycle to do like a traditional onboarding. So at the moment, we don't split anything functionally, kind of within the success world at least. So my CSMs will look after onboarding, they look after adoption, they look after value, documentation and delivery. They will manage renewals. They are also looking for expansion. So they're expanding into predominantly either the same use case in another part of the business or new use cases with other products. So they're looking to deepen our technical engagement. And they also handle the kind of negotiation as part of that expansion. So Ably is a consumption-based platform. So customers essentially commit to an amount of stuff they'll use yearly. So the team are very much targeted on adoption because the more adoption we can drive, the more consumption that leads to, therefore, the more revenue we generate from those customers. And that is measured through NRR. So typically I'm looking at adoption and NRR.
All right, I want to jump in here for a moment because if you're listening to this conversation about turning renewals into predictable revenue forecasts and building an upsell pipeline, then there's something you need to know. Everything that we're talking about here, from forecasting confidence to value conversations to expansion discovery, that's exactly what I teach inside of RevUp Academy. So if you're listening and thinking, I need this and I want to get better at tying customer outcomes to commercial clarity, and I want to stop guessing my way through renewals, then you are exactly who I built RevUp Academy for. Last year, so many CS pros told me they wanted to drive more revenue and show up with more commercial confidence, but they never actually got the coaching or the frameworks to help them do it consistently. Now imagine walking into 2026 with complete clarity around your accounts. You know how to forecast renewals without second guessing yourself, and you know how to lead discovery that naturally uncovers expansion. You know how to build trust so customers view you as a strategic partner, not as someone who's just an admin. And that is the version of you that we are going to build inside of RevUp Academy. And the most important part is that enrollment is currently open and doors close on February 5th. After that, we are going to shift our focus to supporting this new cohort. So we will not open doors again until later in 2026. So if you want to join us, now is the time. You've got to join us. So go ahead and go to thecustomersuccesspro.com/RevUp to secure your spot today. That's thecustomersuccesspro.com/RevUp. And I can't wait to work with you inside the academy. All right, let's get back to the show. I love that. I love that. North Star metrics. I think that's what CS should be looking after. But it's interesting that you mentioned that you're consumption based as well, because I think a lot of people listening are traditional SaaS, not consumption. So they have an annual subscription, their customers sign up, they're hoping to see value based on the feature functionality of their software. But I know you mentioned this, and I'd love to get in a little bit deeper. You have been at SaaS businesses that aren't consumption based.
Sure.
So were you a commercial customer success leader there? What did that look like?
Yes, I was. And I've always had the same opinion that it depends on the type of product and the type of business you have, and also the type of customers to some extent. But customer success is a commercial function, right? Because a renewal ultimately is a lagging outcome of how much success and value you've delivered all year. Because if theoretically more success, bigger renewal, not as much success, flat or worse potentially. And I think in a more traditional SaaS model where you might be selling seats or specific features, you're looking to kind of maximize value by adding adjacency. And I think it's a similar thing, right? You take what the customer has initially as their problem, what they want to achieve, have they achieved it, and then how can you complement and augment that value with potentially other things that might drive expansion? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And I think that it's a similar model because I'm not advocating for more seats, more features, or more consumption for the sake of it. It has to be based on, I've solved this problem for my customer, we've delivered this value outcome, what's next? How else can we help? Whether that is just doing the same thing for more people or in a different business unit or doing different things that are adjacent to the initial problem you had originally.
Yeah, I love that. I also love that you just said that a renewal is a sale. I completely agree. It is. And
It is.
how much value you deliver throughout a customer journey is going to determine how large or how small of a sale it is. And I think if anyone in customer success is out there thinking that I don't work in sales, I truly do believe that renewal is actually the next sale, not necessarily something that's guaranteed. It isn't. Your contract, whatever it is that your customer has signed, has just been for that 1 year, or maybe if you're lucky, multiple years, but it's just that one signed term. And then as much as we say we're subscription based, we still have to get that renewal. They have every right to cancel. And like you said, it can be flat, it can be less, it can really change the game, but we keep like demonizing that it's a sale. And it is a sale, and it needs to be normalized. It needs to be understood that our teams are spending every single day, week, month, the entire customer journey showing value. And I love that you've just highlighted it because it's so important to call it out and say it as it is, because I think sometimes we like to sugarcoat things in customer success or almost skirt around things. And it's tough, but it is kind of the reality of where we find ourselves.
I think so. I think a lot of people are quite detached. A lot of CSMs I talk to and some CS leaders, although fewer these days, are quite detached from what you do and how that delivers revenue for your business.
Yeah. And I don't know why.
I don't know why either. I'm like, if you don't understand how the things that people buy relates to whether or not your business is doing well or poorly and how you can influence that, that's fundamental business leadership. And I think it makes it so much easier for you as a CS leader to be able to say to your team, look, here's all the things that you can do. If we do them well, business grows, everyone happy. And it's quite, for me, impactful. I don't know why it's slow to pick up in.
I as someone who's always had revenue or commercial targets from as early as I can remember, because I moved from account management into customer success, it just is foreign that for some CS leaders and CS teams, it's almost like a new concept, which is wild because if you've ever had to mitigate churn or secure a renewal or also get upsells or grow accounts, all of that is commercial and revenue oriented. So it's just funny how we tend to position ourselves as, no, we're advisors or we're business consultants, which yes, we are. But to what end? We are obviously working around a revenue number and a revenue metric. And I love that you continue to just say it as it is. But you have been in CS for a while, like you said, and you've really grown through the ranks. You're currently VP of Customer Success. And I love asking my guests kind of what inspired you to end up in customer success, but also being where you are currently in your career. What's your next big career and ambition or dream, or what's next for you?
Ooh, it's a great question. I started my life as a project manager on the client side, actually. So I used to work for a big retailer here in the UK, and my job was implement software into stores and onto our online platform that would increase conversion. Yep. So get customers who were offline, online, and vice versa. And I worked with a load of really cool software companies as part of that. And it was really, that was what I was doing. And then I had the opportunity to go and work for one of those software companies to do exactly that. So customer project delivery. And this was such a long time ago that I can barely remember it. But that's when I learned what customer success was, because I did the project, implemented the thing, and then we were a startup. I had no one to give them to, so they just stayed with me. And then how I became a customer success manager and how I then built the processes and built the team and et cetera, et cetera. And I've been doing that now for longer than I want to admit, if I'm honest. And I suppose what's next for me is a continuation of that growth. I've moved into different tech verticals. I've worked across all sorts of different sizes of companies, different stages of funding. And for me, I really enjoy building things for small companies and taking on that scaling journey. So I think I will continue to want to do that. I've dabbled a little bit in sales, but looking at revenue from new business all the way through to expansion, I think is probably where I'm going. So probably more revenue focused, commercial focused from across the business perspective.
Yeah, I love that. I also think that is the future of go-to-market. I know there's a lot of chief revenue officers out there that are looking at the full go-to-market function. So from the day a lead hits your website, so a marketing top of funnel, all the way to close of deal conversion, and then continuing on all the way to the renewal. And I think it's also being rebranded as a chief commercial officer so that CS and sales and marketing all sit under that umbrella. But I do think that's the forward model of where SaaS businesses are going. I'm curious also the trajectory we're on, like how quickly we get to that model, because it used to be that there was a specific leader for each part of the go-to-market function, but it seems like it's meshing more. So it's interesting to hear that that's the direction you want to take your career as well. Because I think for revenue-focused CS leadership, that is a clear path to looking at everything holistically, because it is the whole journey. A customer hits your website, they have a problem they're trying to fix or find, and then they look around and marketing converts them into a warmer lead and so on and so forth. And then it's eventually a renewal. And I think having one model underneath that is super important. And we've talked a lot about different models already, and we've already talked about revenue and commercial side of customer success, which is what we're here to really dive into. But you've worked across multiple different commercial models, and again, you've always been a revenue first or commercial first leader, which I think is extremely important. But for a lot of people, that's still a new concept. I'm wondering what shaped your thinking around how you do renewals, forecasting, revenue ownership in CS. Because for some people listening, it might be completely new to them. And for others, it might be, oh, I really need to double down or focus on this. And it seems like something you've done intentionally throughout your career. So I'm wondering what made you start thinking and shaping everything around CS, around commercials?
It's a really good question. I think it is understanding how the work that you do affects the outcomes of your business and how much you want to kind of connect what you're delivering to something bigger than, oh, I've just, delivered an outcome for a customer. As great as that is, right? I'm not downplaying. One of the best things that you can do is help a customer unblock something that may or may not drive revenue at one point. But I think it's being part of the leadership. And I was quite lucky in one of my first tech roles. Because I was one of the first people in the door, I ended up in a leadership position quite early on, where I had access to, if we do this and we execute this well, this is how that impacts our business and therefore everyone in the business. And I think when you start to, and I always recommend this to CS leaders, I'm like, if you don't know how to read a P&L, if you don't understand how your business makes money, if you don't understand how much it costs you to deliver your services, you need to go and talk to your CFO or your VP of finance so that you have a really clear understanding of the impact of the decisions that you make. Because every time you give someone a credit, every time you give someone a discount, every time you automatically raise a price, there's a knock-on impact. And you have to get out of your silo. I think we're far too siloed. And a lot of people like to focus on, this is what I'm good at, this is exactly what I'm delivering. And someone else can worry about like negotiating the contract if you're giving it back to sales, or how this plays out in terms of how much it costs us to do business. But I've always just been really curious, and I really wanted to get into that stuff. And then once I realized or understood the link between the things I'm doing with my customers directly impact these things on our P&L and our COGS and our EBITDA and all those fun things, I think it makes it more tangible. And then you get more focused in on, actually, it isn't sell everything to everyone. It's maximize capacity in these 5 places. This is what's going to move the dial. And I think it's that kind of connection for me personally anyway.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true. Like financial literacy, you are a business leader. And if you really want to show up as a business leader, like everyone else in the executive team is trying to do and making sure you're growing a business, it's so important to make sure you have the ability to understand, but also articulate what your team is actually doing, connected back to, like you said, the P&L. Super, super important. But something else you called out, which made me smile, which is really true. We tend to be the most cross-functional team in customer success, meaning we work with everyone from product to engineering to marketing to sales, you name it. But you are so right. Sometimes our mindset is so siloed in the sense that we're like, okay, let's just throw it over the fence to someone else to deal with. But at the end of the day, if you want that true ownership, if you do want to be a business leader within the company, it is understanding that you need to work collaboratively and you need to understand the impact of your team and the decisions you make on the ultimate P&L, like you just said, which is really, really helpful. And I think helpful for everyone. Anyone who's accelerating their career, if you want to be a true executive leader, no matter the department you sit in, it is so important to understand that financial literacy. So I'm glad you called that out. And you don't come from a sales background, but I do. And I am super curious to get your take on a dirty word in customer success, which is the word quota. I've personally always had a quota. My early days in CS, I reported to a VP of sales. So that target quota was normal for me. But I know when we talked, you mentioned that your team has 120% NRR target. And that's a quota, in my opinion. But I know a lot of customer success pros do not see it as that. We like to call them KPIs or goals or a measurement of success or whatever anyone's calling it these days. But how did you help your team get into that mindset of you have a quota, you have a commercial target to hit, and how did you make them comfortable with that?
Comfortable is probably still an ongoing thing because it is quite new, right? I've only been at Ably a couple of months, and whilst the team have always been commercial, the way in which I've set it up from a RevOps perspective is slightly different. But I do think it's clarity, and I think a lot of people, certainly that I've spoken to, the reason that quota is such a dirty word is because it's intrinsically related to sales, and we are different. We are not sales. But you're right. If you've got a 120% NRR target, you have a quota. That's that 20%. And the way that I've always made people comfortable with it, both in my current role and in roles in the past, is to break it down and say, if your book of business is $1 million, your 120%, you need to add, gosh, do maths in my head, oh my God, 200K. That's roughly 50K a quarter. Now we have to factor in any risk that you might find because that will fluctuate. This has to be net. But actually our average expansion size post first year renewal is 25K per expansion, whatever that might be, if it's a new module or additional consumption. So realistically, you now have to have a pipeline of 2 customers per quarter who are going to look to expand in some way. And then depending on how long it takes a customer to go from I'm interested in expanding to actually expanding, we have to factor that in. So it's working the mechanisms back, because if you say to somebody, oh, you need to generate 500K of new revenue this year from existing customers, they're immediately going to panic. But once you break that down to this is how much that is per quarter, therefore this is how many things you need to do and how many customers you need to engage with, it makes it much more operational. And I don't feel like enough people do this. When I talk to my peers, I don't think they've got like an idea of how many opportunities they need in their pipeline.
Yeah,
they don't even
exactly.
think about it like a pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. But it is exactly that.
And
I
it's exactly
completely agree.
That's what it is.
Yeah. And as someone, again, coming from someone who worked at a sales function before, when I was given a quota, a spreadsheet of exactly what the target was. And I was taught how to reverse engineer my goal. So if I had to close 200K of new business, then I would have to think, okay, 200K equals how many opportunities if I have a 50% close win rate. That means I need double of 200K to make sure I hit I need to generate 400K of pipeline to hit the 200K closed one. And sales works like that. It is math. And I was always told to reverse engineer my entire book and what I was trying to work with. And I'm so glad you said you work with your team on this in that way and you make it tangible for them and you really break it down, because I think that's something as leaders we should be doing more of, because giving a huge target or even just any target to your team is overwhelming, and they're like, okay, I'm going to just go do a number of calls with customers, or I'm going to go do certain business reviews, or I'm going to make sure I do X, Y, and Z, because a lot of CS people equate activity to renewal or to upsell, which, yes, activity can be a big part of that, but it's not everything. And you have to really filter out the noise. And a lot of that comes from reverse engineering the quota or the 120 NRR that you just called out, which I completely agree. If anyone's listening and thinking for their team, how am I going to make it happen in 2026? Break it down, like make it tangible, make it tactical for them. I love that you shared that.
Totally. And the kind of benefit that you have in CS versus new business sales is that you've already got these sales events that are renewals that are dotted throughout the year. And customers are much more likely to expand when you're at a renewal because you're already talking to them about revenue and having that conversation. So if I know that in Q2 I've got all of my big renewals, I can really bake a lot of stuff into that and start working 6 months in advance and talking to them about ways to add value and new things they can be doing and stuff. And it's reverse engineering, like you said, but it's also timeline mapping. I'm like, look at 2026. Where are your big renewals? Where are you putting your bets? Mm-hmm. Sales have to go generate that pipeline from fresh. Yours is sitting there. It's already mapped out. You've just got to build around it.
Exactly. It's not as difficult as we like to make it for ourselves.
It's scary. It's not as bad. It's
not as scary. And that's why I wanted to start off the whole conversation where commercial isn't really that dirty of a word. And it's a big part of what we do every day. And I know you focus a lot with your teams on renewals and really forecasting renewals and being able to predict and make sure that when you go to your leadership team, you're able to give a clear picture of what renewals will look like. But can you walk us through kind of what is your renewal framework? I know that you ask certain questions of your customers as well, and I know you've helped your team get comfortable with these questions. So what does that look like if a CSM at your company was going through a renewal cycle with a customer?
Sure. So for me, forecasting is 6 months out. So we forecast for the current quarter and the next quarter. So current and +1. And that gives us the ability to say, right, for the next 6 months, this is what our revenue pattern will look like, and this is what will happen. Like, for all of those customers who are now coming into the forecast pipe, if you like, my expectation is that at the 6 month mark, the CSM has had a conversation with their champion about whether or not we have delivered enough value or whether we are delivering enough value to secure their business for a further year. And the reason it has to be 6 months or better is because you need runway to make a change, right?
Yes.
You can't do anything in 3 months.
Yeah. I don't know how you get anything done in 3 months when a customer maybe books a meeting a month in advance kind of thing.
Exactly. I'm like, our Q4 started at the beginning of November and I already feel like it's solid, the numbers that we'll achieve are pretty much baked, even though we've got 2 months left to go. You can't do much in a quarter because
not as all.
So you've got to get ahead of the game. So every week, my team will go through and they will update their forecast based on things that have meaningfully changed in the customer account, activities that's gone on. Because we're a consumption business, usage does tend to be a leading indicator for how much the customer will spend or commit to.
Yeah.
But the concept of risk and account management and account planning is built around a 3 questions framework, which I've been using for a couple of years, which essentially are 3 primary things that you have to answer about each of your customer accounts, which are: who cares? So which stakeholders do you have? How engaged are they? Are they champions? Are they detractors? Do they sign contracts? How multi-threaded are we? All of those sorts of things. The second one is how deep. So how technically spread out are we? Are they using surface level features? Are they more integrated? Are they using multiple products? It stands to reason in most SaaS companies that the more products a customer's using, the stickier they tend to be. So, what does our technical landscape look like within that account? And then the third one really revolves around, do they have a defined ROI that they can talk about and that they can measure? And what's changing? So these are things like relationships. Are things going up or down? How's their usage tracking? What are the actual day-to-day kind of feelings that you're getting from that customer account that makes you either confident that you know what they're up to or less confident and they could go some other direction? And it's not a health framework, because I think we spend a lot of time obsessing about customer health, but it actually ends up just being a huge data collection exercise, and then it's kind of useless once it's done.
Yeah.
But it's more like a check-in. So once a quarter, once a month, depending on the size of account and the type of motion they're in. How many people are we talking to? Have they done anything new? Have they turned anything on or off? And then what's changing?
Yeah.
And those are the three things that predict most outcomes. And it makes me feel confident that my CSMs are talking to their customers about the right things.
Yeah.
You have some sense of which direction they're going in.
Yeah, I love that. You're not only marking the important dates, but you're telling your CSMs exactly what should be qualified in those important dates by those questions. But you mentioned 6 months. I want to jump in and double click on that a little bit because it is a good amount of time, I think, but also enough time to give yourself to really understand if that renewal is going to be a no-brainer or you're going to have to work a little bit harder to get that renewal. So why do you do the 6-month rule, and how do you kind of get your CSMs to start qualifying renewals as soon as possible? Why is that 6 months so important to you guys?
I think 6 months just makes a lot of sense. It always has. I used to work with a CS leader who was very stuck on the 6 months, and it made a lot of sense to me because you can't, if you do any earlier, it's almost like renewal. How about we talk about your next renewal? And they're too close. There's not enough of the space. Whereas at the 6 month mark, and again, depending on who your stakeholder is and who you're talking to, you can get an accurate read on you've got enough, hopefully, stuff done in that 6 months and enough value delivered that you can measure and point to, which builds momentum over time. But also you need some sort of revenue predictability because if I introduce something to you today and say, this is amazing, you should try this, it's going to take you probably 3 months to actually get around to doing it. Or, there'll be things on your side. My biggest challenge is that I work with very technical stakeholders. Our customers are incredibly technical. They've got to prioritize everything on their side. So all of our discovery is built around understanding kind of like the pain and the impact so that we can try and help them prioritize the things as more urgent or more important, because otherwise everything's just, it's great, but we'll get to it when we get to it.
So, exactly. It's on their timeline, their time, and every customer has their own timeline and their own busy schedules, calendars, inboxes, and you have to kind of fit in there, which again, it's so important to give yourself enough time for that. The other question I have is CSMs tend to avoid direct renewal questions. It's another thing. It's like the whole commercial is dirty, but also quota is a word we don't use in customer success. And also direct questions tend to intimidate customer success professionals. And I know I coach a lot of people on how to get more comfortable with that. But when I was a CSM, I always used to ask the direct question of, if your renewal was due tomorrow, would you renew? And that gave me a really great tell of, oh no, this is a churn risk customer, or yes, this is great, a renewals going forward. I can start the procedures of doing that next. How did you help your CSMs kind of get more comfortable with asking those qualifying questions, but also asking the direct questions that are so important to understand if a renewal is going to happen?
I tell them my horror story because I used to hate that question. I would never ask direct questions. I thought I could tell the whole thing on usage and vibes. And then one day my biggest...
If only we can make renewals happen on vibes.
I just vibe it through, it'll be fine. My biggest customer churned on me and I had the best relationship with them, but the value wasn't there and it didn't stack up. And they were a great internal champion for implementation because they were in the business change unit, but they were not the BAU user, so they weren't going to be the owner long term. And it completely blindsided me. And if I'd have I was working it very hard, but if I'd have done some really deep discovery into the actual business value or the desired outcomes of the person who was going to own the product long term, and if I'd have looked at the numbers more closely, and if I'd have just asked the question, I was terrified of asking the question because I didn't want the answer. And that's the problem. Like, if you just have to rip off the Band-Aid, right? And once
and I always say that if you don't ask, you're never going to know. And it's better to know. Like, I would rather know exactly what churn I can expect rather than suddenly being blindsided and slapped in the face when a month before renewal, the customer tells me they've moved on to a competitor. I would rather know. Maybe that's like my type A planning personality coming out, but I would rather know because it just sets me and my customer up for success by asking the direct question. And you'd be surprised, I think, for anyone out there that's listening thinking, oh no, that can't be me. I don't want to rip off the Band-Aid. You'd be surprised at how much your customers also appreciate a direct approach because nobody wants the uncomfortable, like, oh, we're gonna go to a competitor or we're looking at different price. Nobody wants to have that conversation. So just having it earlier or having a direct question go out helps everyone, not just yourself. It is truly something that everybody wants, but nobody wants to take the first step, which is always so awkward. But let's sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say 100%. We've got I've had teams in my past who've relied on things like auto renews, and they don't want to talk to the customer about their renewal that's coming up.
Wait.
They might, if I talk to them about it, they might not renew. And I'm like, if they're not going to renew, they're not going to renew anyway, and you're just going to annoy me when it turns out they're going to renew anyway.
So just everyone off.
Exactly. If you don't know, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, we've talked about getting ready for renewals. We've talked about qualifying, asking the right questions, making sure you ask direct questions and do that deeper level of discovery. But let's talk about once all that's complete. So qualification is now complete. How does that data move into your CRM for you as a leader to be able to build that forecast renewal model that you like building out?
So we have a weekly. It's one of the earliest things that I learned was that cadence is everything, right? You have to have like a rhythm to your business where there's an expectation that certain things will happen on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis that gives you that data availability and therefore predictability. So we have a weekly forecast call where my team will update their HubSpot forecast. We use HubSpot. They'll update their forecast, which is essentially what they expect the renewal size to be, their best case and their worst case, and the notes, so that I can go through it, and then we drill into specific deals and specific questions, and we do a bit of more of a deep dive on a weekly basis. And we do the same thing we call them projects, but they're essentially adoption projects. We have a pipeline of things that our customers are doing, which will accelerate their consumption, essentially. And doing that every week kind of sets the tone that one, renewal is the most important thing on your to-do list this week. You must focus on these because they're deals and they have outcomes. And two, that we will be progressing them on a weekly basis through the quarter. And you always think, oh, well, nothing changes on a week-to-week basis. And I'm like, because you're not focused on it, nothing changes.
The second something's in your week to week, in your calendar, in front of your face, of course it's going to change because you're suddenly putting emphasis and energy into that one thing. But I love that you do forecast weekly. I love all of that. And you mentioned best case, worst case, and actual, which is something I did in a previous role as well. But how is that, how do you actually evaluate best case, worst case? What's your data behind that? How do you justify the evidence in best case, worst case, rather than it just being a guess? Because again, with forecasting, there is guesswork. Of course it is. It's a forecast. It's not set in stone, but there must be something you're doing to make sure that you have some sort of tolerance of what is a best case and what is a worst case.
So because we are a consumption business, it's based at the moment predominantly on either qualitative evidence from a customer about what they're doing or what they'll need, or a capacity that's associated to something new that's going to happen, or their usage. So they will have a committed capacity or a committed spend. And if they're really under and they're using 30% of it, I would expect the worst case to be 30% of their current contract value totally. In other places, it's kind of been I think usage, this is probably quite hypocritical because I'm like, usage is not the same as value. You can't rely on usage. Usage doesn't predict outcomes, and that is true. But when it comes to revenue, it kind of does. Because even if you're selling user seats or features, or you're in a more traditional SaaS model, if somebody's buying 100 seats and they're only using 10, your worst case is going to be a 10% renewal, right? So it kind of does factor that way. And then you can add in the kind of standard deviation, the tolerance that you have. And I do that. I have my own manager forecast field where I'll look at it and I'll be like, based on everything I know about this customer, this stakeholder, their last renewal cycle, and all of the information the CSM has given me, they're being very pessimistic. CSMs are usually quite pessimistic in forecasts. I always find this. Everyone's going to...
I don't know why. They don't really believe in...
They're not.
They don't really believe that they can actually close a renewal. They almost always give themselves way more churn rather than way more predicted renewal.
100%. So in my last job, where I managed new business sales and CSMs, for new business sales, I would just bring the forecast down by like 20%, and for CS I'd add 20% off balance.
That's so funny. There's this mindset between new business versus CS on how they forecast. I love that.
It's hilarious. It's so hilarious to watch. But yeah, I think using the data, then adding on your opinion, because quite a lot of forecasting is based on whether or not you feel like you can deliver the number you're standing behind. As long as there's some basis for kind of you giving me that number, I'm all right with that.
Yeah, I love that. And also, like you said, you kind of have to, it is a little bit of finger in the air and a little bit of guesswork and making sure you feel comfortable with the number that you're putting out there to your leadership team or the board or whoever else wants to understand renewals. But there is a tolerance that you have to kind of understand and work with, and forecasting is just that. But let's talk a little bit about upsells, because that's also something your team looks after. Walk us through that. How do you guys actually help your team get on calls and understand which accounts should grow, which accounts they should focus on when it comes to upsells? Because in most businesses, upsells land at renewals, or at least close-ish to a renewal. So how do you get your team on calls early enough to make their own forecasts and make sure they qualify accounts correctly when it comes to an upsell?
This is where I think upsells fit very naturally with like the CS motion. If you're talking to your customers enough about the things that they're doing and how you're helping them and how you're uncovering solutions to the problem that they brought you to solve, and if you're working with them on ways that you can add value adjacencies, you will uncover opportunities, whether that is, oh, this other team has exactly the same problem, I'll introduce you to this person, or whether it's, we've also got this other kind of related and similar problem. Can you help with that? And I think that's the most important thing, being strategically aligned to your customer's roadmap, what they're doing, why they had the problem that they needed you for in the first place, and what they're doing, and doing discovery around that. I also, we had a team planning session this week, actually, and one of the sessions was on discovery and letting customers sit in the pain of a problem that they have long enough for you to understand how much of an issue it is, right? I think, and I do this all the time, I'm the worst one for it. You tell me that you've got a problem, I'm immediately flipping into solution mode, and I give you, like, here's a thing I can help you with, this is great. But actually, you need to ask 4, 5, 6 more questions to understand if that's an actual thing that needs doing or if it's a nice to have. And as you're doing that as part of a typical success motion, that's when you uncover new opportunities. It's not about turning up 3 weeks before a renewal and asking somebody if they need more of something. Yeah. I find that that's kind of like the old school account management style and very outdated. And potentially why I find it so... I don't like the idea of having a CSM and an account manager, for instance, because it's like a doubling up, right? You introduce this sale.
Yeah, it's almost like good cop, bad cop, but both parties are seen as the bad cop. I don't think it's actually well received from a customer's perspective. Like, I've been on the customer side of having an AM and a CSM, and it almost feels like I almost instantly know, oh, I'm going to be sold to in some way, shape, or form. And it's okay. I know I'm constantly being sold to. You're either selling or being sold to. That's just human nature. But I find it really awkward because this person is coming in, kind of getting a little bit of the details, a little bit, like never going to have the full understanding because they're not there with me all the time using the product. But then suddenly going to tell me how I'm going to be able to use the product even more if I pay more, for example. And it's just, it doesn't feel right to me. I would rather have it come from a CSM, but that's, again, maybe a little bit of my own bias of how CS works.
I totally agree with you, because I feel like when I'm talking to somebody who is legitimately interested in helping me solve more problems so that I can extract more value, I'm much more inclined to kind of tell you what more of my problems are. Whereas when someone pops up that's an account manager, I'm like, oh, the answer to my problems is spending more money, right? And it's just, I think it works in some cases, and it works for some types of companies and customers and teams, for sure. But for upsells specifically, it's an ongoing discovery process, and it's part of the CS function, I would say, because
I
you're
agree. I think discovery has to happen almost on every single interaction with your customer. I do not think we do it enough in customer success. We do it on our kickoff, in onboarding, maybe in a business review or value review call, but that's about it. Like, we forget all the discovery we can have in the odd conversation, in the quick lunch meeting we have with the customer, in a quick, 30-minute call that we have just to go over something new in an account. Like, there's so much discovery that can be had at so many different points in the customer journey that we tend to forget it, and we tend to only think that it's important when we need to get something out from a customer like an upsell, which is just the wrong way about going about it. If you want an upsell to feel natural, it's discovery at every interaction with the customer.
Oh, 100%. One of my team said to me that they didn't want to ask too many questions because they wanted to make sure they were delivering value in these meetings. And I was like, we often, and I do this as well, often overestimate, one, how much people like talking about themselves and the clever things they're trying to solve, and how much help they're looking for, right? Like, our customers don't know the answer. We are experts, right? At Ably, we are experts in delivering real-time experiences. Our customers want to talk to us about their challenges because they want our opinion. That's the bottom line. And the second thing is, like, you're delivering value just by asking, right? Customers like to have these conversations. And if they don't want to have these conversations, they probably wouldn't be booking meetings with you.
Exactly. They would just ghost you. They would not show up to the meeting if they didn't want to have that conversation. I love that you pointed it out. And I love that we're talking so much about discovery and upsells. Is your team kind of tracked on upsells the same way that we've talked about renewals so far? I'm curious, how are you making sure your team generates a specific uplift? Because I think you guys have an ambitious goal, which is great, or a target or quota or whatever you want to call it. But how do you end up guiding your team to make sure that they're doing the right discovery at the right time and that they're generating enough uplift for you guys to hit that NRR number?
It's a really good question. So most of our uplift and our expansion happens at renewal. It can happen outside of renewal. But realistically, our customers are purchasing a committed amount of consumption over an annual period. So actually, uplift is simply just usage expansion, because if I can help you as a customer burn through your consumption commitment faster, your next renewal will be in 9 months instead of 12. So that's the goal. So in terms of uplift, I don't focus explicitly on a 20K extra in a quarter deal for a customer. I'm focusing on my team and their pipeline of projects. So we've got 3 customers who want to do this new feature, 3 customers who are doing this thing, 1 customer who's introducing us to another team, because the expansion of adoption and more adoption overall will produce more revenue. It also produces more retention. So that check might be in the post in 6 months or so, but ultimately, by focusing on ways that we can maximize the customer's value from using more of our product, we'll cash it out eventually, just maybe not today.
Yeah. And you mentioned that a lot of it happens during renewal, which is typical for most companies. How do you bring both renewal qualification and upsell pipeline together into your full NRR strategy? Because that's a lot. Like, that's a lot to juggle. It's a lot for any one customer success manager that's doing a call here, an internal meeting here. There's just a lot going on, and CSMs are being asked to do more than they've ever done before. And I know AI is helping us, but there's a lot of critical thinking and a lot of strategic thinking involved in making sure you're correctly doing renewal qualification as well as building upsell pipeline. So how are you making sure your team is balancing all of that under your current strategy?
I think renewal qualification is explicit across most accounts, but it is also somewhat implied across customers where they are engaging with you in more stuff. Because unlike a traditional SaaS, I've got the benefit of, because we're kind of an infrastructure platform, our customers have to build technology and build software around our APIs and around our SDKs. And if a customer's investing time and engineering effort and resource into building more stuff on our platform, then it doesn't make the renewal a done deal, and you still have to do renewal qualification, but it's a great demonstration of engagement. It's not like they can just turn all their seats off tomorrow and go over to some other CRM, for instance. So they do kind of go together, and it's all about making sure that you're understanding how much consumption and an extra feature will have. And it's I would love to say there's an exact science to it. Maybe there will be once I've been here another 6 months and I've got some more numbers. But in the same way that if as a CSM you turn up and ask your customer what their goals are, they probably don't know. It's very difficult to predict how much stuff people will end up using for a particular use case in our world. So in a more traditional kind of SaaS space, you do still use usage, you do still use adjacency. And I think it's more about making sure that you're maximizing the attention of the people that you're talking to, because people will want to talk to you more when their renewal is coming. You need
natural. Yeah. Suddenly attention is much more at the forefront because there is a money associated with it. There's suddenly going to be an ask for more money because you're going to have to commit to another year or multiple year contract. So your customer is suddenly sitting up a much straighter in their seat when paying attention to you because, okay, we really have to engage at this point. I love all of this, by the way. This is super, super helpful. I'm also thinking about anyone who's listening who is, again, maybe either first time considering being a commercial revenue leader in customer success, or maybe they're listening to this podcast and realize I need to be more revenue focused as a leader. Do you have any tips, tricks, best practices, anything? If you look back at your career, your growth in customer success as a revenue leader, is there anything that you would just call out and say to anyone listening as a best tip or best practice?
I think I said it earlier, it's get to understand how you generate revenue, how your business generates revenue, what it runs on, and how that is all kind of recognized and accounted for. If you don't understand how the decisions you make on a day-to-day basis impact the P&L, then I think it can be really overwhelming, but it's really fundamental to understanding exactly how and why things work. I also think drilling into the idea of reverse engineering, like we talked about with RevOps, again, if you've never done it before, it sounds pretty scary, but once you've worked it out and you realize that actually 200,000 divided by 4 is not as bad as 200,000 looks as a whole number, it makes it better. And I would also say that I am only as confident as I am in lots of ways around commercials because I've had some great bosses. I've had some brilliant leaders who've really helped me understand the relationship between all of these different things and helped me understand negotiation principles, which was quite unnatural to me when I first started doing it. So if you don't feel like you have somebody around you in your organization that potentially would lean into helping you understand and work through this, I'd really consider getting a coach. I've had some great coaches as well that can just give you that 360 external feedback to point you in the right direction. I do think you need specificity, particularly to get into a P&L. Like, I would happily read someone else's P&L just because I'm nosy, but you kind of need the context. but like sales strategy and RevOps and commercial thinking and discovery, I think sometimes a third-party opinion can be really helpful.
It is. And I love that you called it out. I didn't ask her to say it, but yes, coaching helps massively. It really does. As someone who is a coach, but as someone who also has multiple coaches in my life, it helps massively. And if any of this sounds intimidating to anyone listening in, it has to come from a space of being uncomfortable, and you have to have someone help you through that uncomfortable. And yes, you can figure it out on your own, which parts of my career I have done that, but other parts I did get a coach and get the help to understand everything. And it made a world of difference on how quickly I was able to understand things, reverse engineer things, forecast, build all that out. But also a big part of coaching and what I coach on is that confidence piece, the ability to actually understand the commercials and then drive the confidence home, because that takes practice and that takes someone guiding you as well. So did not ask Emma to say any of that, but thanks, Emma, for setting me up for talking about that. But we could talk about commercial for probably weeks, years. I don't know. We could do a whole series on this podcast on this, but I would love to wrap us up with my favorite part of every podcast discussion with every guest is I always like to challenge my guest to the quick fire questions, where I ask all my guests to answer the next few questions in a sentence or less. Are you ready?
Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, my first question for you is, if you could predict the future, what do you think customer success will focus on next year?
We're going to move from consumption to outcome economy.
I love that. I agree. I totally agree. I think everyone's looking for revenue outcomes no matter what business you're in. Amazing. Next question is, which app or software do you use every day or every week? It could be on your phone, it could be on your laptop, and it could be CS or non-CS related.
Claude.
Oh, yeah.
Changed my life.
Yeah. I was like, everyone uses an AI tool in their pocket every day, every hour of every day. Amazing. On that note, the next question is, what is one cool thing that you're doing or new thing that you're doing with AI these days?
We are building agents to do a lot of the paperwork. So things like account research, look at usage, generate me a renewal offer, all of that sort of thing. So just a lot of the paperwork that takes a lot of time.
Yep.
We're getting first draft.
Love it. I love hearing that people have moved off of prompts and now into agents. It's like the next evolution with AI. I love it. I love it. Okay. And if you could change one thing about customer success, what would it be?
Oh God, that's such a hard question. That's not my sentence. What would I change about customer success? I would make us more outcome focused.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think we have to evolve from task focused to outcome focused. I agree. Amazing. Last question is, who should be my next podcast guest?
Oh, that's a great question also. I would say one of my friends, Thomas Voigt. He has some great opinions. We have a lot of good customer success chats.
Amazing. Thomas, if you're listening to this episode, please reach out. I'd love to have you on the show. And thank you so much, Emma, for being a part of this conversation, for chatting what I love to chat about the most too, which is revenue and commercial side of CS. But if my listeners have anything more they want to discuss with you or have any follow-up questions to this conversation, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
You can get hold of me on LinkedIn. I'm just Emma Lambert, or you can check out my website, which probably needs updating actually, which is emmalampert.com.
Amazing. And I will make sure to link that all down below. Thank you again, Emma, for coming on the show.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Customer Success Pro podcast. I hope you picked up something valuable to take back to your team. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to me if you took just 10 seconds to leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It helps more CS pros like yourself discover the show. And creating new episodes takes a lot of work, so leaving a nice review keeps me motivated to keep creating. And don't forget to hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcast episodes. I drop a new episode every Wednesday packed with practical tips. And if you've got a topic you'd love for me to cover or want to be a guest on my show, send me a message. All the details are in the show notes. I'd love to hear from you. And hey, if this episode helped you, share it with a fellow CSM or CS leader. Remember, sharing is caring. Cheers to your CS journey, and I'll catch you next week for our next episode.